Well, hello there, friends and family. Hope y'all are doing well today, and I hope your families are all safe and well as well. Now, I wanted to jump on here and talk about something that you're going to start to see. It's already taking traction across all the internet and all, social journalism platforms, the ones that are supposed to inform us without any agendas, conspiracy, and what have you. You keep informed and safe from the mainstream media. Well, sometimes that's just not the case. And another reason I wanted to talk about this issue, EMP, that's what we're going to be talking about, is because I don't want you going out there loading up your credit cards, draining your bank accounts all of a sudden, because people are putting out there on all the social media platforms, and this thing is spreading like a wildfire across the internet. Yes, it is. It's the latest. And it's the latest example of the panic plane taking off and making its flight not only across America, but the entire planet. It all started on September the 4th, 2020. Now, that's when it started on social media. The root of this came when DHS, Department of Homeland Security, issued a 5-paragraph, rather ambiguous report about EMPs as an evolving threat. Well, mainstream media didn't pick it up. And of course, that just adds to the conspiracy theory of this particular topic. You see why? Well, here again, our social media justice warriors can sit here and add to it. We're being deceived. It's a cover-up. Why aren't we being told about this? Well, let me tell you why. And then off they go. But like I said, that report came out on September the 3rd. Many of the platforms got it wrong, said September the 2nd. And of course, like always, I'll be showing you the actual links to the sites that we'll be discussing today. But as far as social media goes, it all started here. Yes, sir. Right here on ZeroHedge.com. And then it spread like wildfire. And like I said before, you're going to be seeing this on many of your favorite channels, whether they're social justice journalists, homesteading, preppers are picking it up. Oh yeah, I even think gardeners will. And God knows what. Because let's all face it, this one has everything. It has fear that both sides, and even the middle of political persuasion, can get behind because of the very title that you're looking at now. As it is here on the Zero Hedge article by Tyler Durden. Came out, like I said, September the 4th, 2020. DHS braces for potential EMP attack as presidential election nears. Woo, that's a great title for an article. Because as you all know, there's a lot of controversy and fear over the U.S. election already about it being corrupt. Now that title right there, what does it say? It puts in your mind that this is going to affect the upcoming presidential election. And whichever side of the aisle you're on, you can look at it different ways. One side's going to say, well, there you go. They're going to try to disrupt the elections. The other side's going to say that this is going to keep us from voting. It's going to wipe out our infrastructure, our power grid, our electronics. Yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. But let's get into this article, because I've done jabbered a little bit too much. But what they say here is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security released a new report warning that a potential electromagnetic pulse EMP attack against the U.S. DHS warning published Thursday, September the 2nd, which is actually September the 3rd, or about 60 days until the U.S. presidential election on November the 3rd. See, it's that they're going to keep mentioning that. Indicates there are evolving threats against the American homeland, most recently highlighting efforts to combat an electromagnetic pulse attack which could disrupt the electrical grid. Now understand what they say, which could, and we'll get into more on that later, and potentially damage electronics. See, they're not saying will, can, no, they're saying could and potentially. Bear those in mind for later on as we discuss this further. The department released an EMP status report via the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This is CISA. That said the key actions to address known EMP-related vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. CISA said an EMP attack could disrupt, degrade, and damage technology, the electrical grid, resulting in additional flare-ups of social economic turmoil. Well, folks, if we're not seeing enough of that right now, right? An EMP attack are part of emerging threats against our nation and demand a response, said senior official performing the duties of the Deputy Secretary, Ken, and I'll probably butcher his name, Ken Cuccinelli. And what he said is that is why DHS is taking these contingencies very seriously, working diligently to mitigate our risk and equipping our state and local partners with the resources they need to do the same. We've made significant progress and look forward to the work ahead. CISA Director Chris Krebs said top priorities of the agency is to mitigate threats associated with EMPs. Over the past year, we have worked with interagency and industry partners to identify the footprint and effects of EMP threats across our national critical functions and are developing sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective approaches to improving the nation's resilience to EMPs. To combat these emerging threats, President Trump signed an executive order in March 2019 delegating power to the White House for EMP preparedness. Yeah, yes he did, back in March 2019, last year. And that's important to note, because if you do your research and look back, you'll see that EMP has come up as a threat, as an issue of concern, and generate thought, panic, and fear, and what have you, before every election cycle since the 2000 election. Yes, it has. Go ahead and look it up. I dare you to. And you'll see that. But then they have this graphic right here. Emp Blast Radius. And what happens here is they show you what's going to happen from the point of detonation out. This depends on the altitude that the nuclear weapon, and that's what man uses to cause an EMP blast, takes place. And they tell you right here at 30 miles above the ground in the atmosphere, it's going to affect things out about 120 miles. You know, at 120 miles above the atmosphere, 1,000 miles from the center of the blast. 300 miles above, 1,470 miles. Those are great areas. And see, the last two cover the majority, if not all, of the U.S. That's frightening, right? Scary. You better get out there and buy all them EMP bags, Faraday cages. Whew. You better be doing your research and searching, getting all your electronics, your vehicles, everything ready, right? Well, hold on a bit, folks. We'll explain later. And then they go down here to say, we recently quoted Peter Vincent Prime, ex-chief staff of the Congressional EMP Commission, who wrote an op-ed that said the virus pandemic from China has exposed dangerous weaknesses in U.S. planning and preparation for civil defense protection and recovery, and those weaknesses surely have noticed by our potential enemies, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and international terrorists. Now, what that has to do with an EMP attack, I don't have a clue. Other than the fact, they're trying to emphasize the fact we're just not prepared for civil defense. Prime warned that China has been planning to defeat the U.S. with an EMP and cyber Pearl Harbor attack for a quarter of a century. And you'll find this crop up all the way back over the last 20 years. Everybody's going to be quoting Prime and things he's said in the past. DHS nor CISA gave any information on evolving EMP threats on the American homeland. There was not mention of whether the threat could be from a solar storm, which that would be what's called a GMD, geomagnetic disturbance, basically massive solar flare or solar storm ejecting corona towards Earth, corona mass. But you can get into all that yourself. However, the EMP status report did mention DHS is currently running EMP pilot tests to assess EMP vulnerability of infrastructure. Finally, the DHS is partnering with other federal departments and agencies, state, local, tribal, and territorial entities, and private sector to field test more resilient critical infrastructure. There are a number of field demonstrations or pilot projects planned and underway, both by DHS and DOE, DOE being the Department of Energy, to assess EMP vulnerability and then deploy, evaluate EMP mitigation and protection technologies. And then they talk about one such pilot here in San Antonio, and it's the Electromagnetic Defense Initiative, designed to show how an entire region can become resilient against an EMP. These pilots are multi-sector, multifunctional efforts, seeking to ensure key capabilities continue to function in post-EMP environment, and that by maintaining those key functions, we can expedite a full recovery, working with federal interagency partners. DHS will play a major role in ensuring communication systems remain operational and by ensuring key systems which are protected against EMP are also protected against other threats such as cyber attacks from the EMP status report. One EMP expert and a friend of the site summed up the report perfectly. Of course, they don't name the friend. We recognize the threat and we're working on it, and we don't need to know any more than that. Thank you for asking. And here again, we're going to stress, the warning comes just 2 months before the U.S. presidential election. Oh my God, folks. Just another reason the presidential elections are being threatened. But are they really? Like I said, EMP crops its ugly head up the year before and the year of every election cycle since the 2000 presidential election. So now what we need to do is actually look at what the DHS put out on September the 3rd. So here it is, folks. Here's the report right here from Homeland Security that is causing all the stir and all the buzz and generating all the fear and panic. DHS combats potential electromagnetic pulse EMP attack. Like I told you, it wasn't released on the 2nd of September. It was released on the 3rd, 2020. And underneath this here, releases electromagnetic pulse EMP program status report. And you can click on this little highlighted link and it'll take you over to the actual agency that submitted the report. Yep, sure will. Which is the CSIA. Yep, and we'll look at it here in just a second. Washington, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, continues to prepare against ever-evolving threats against the American homeland, most recently highlighting efforts to combat an electromagnetic pulse attack which could disrupt the electric grid and potentially damage electronics. Today, the department is releasing the Electromagnetic Pulse EMP program status report as part of an update on efforts underway in support of Executive Order EO 13865, which was signed by the President, like I said, on March the 26th, 2019, on coordinating national resilience to electromagnetic pulses. EO 13865 establishes resilience and security standards for U.S. critical infrastructure as a national priority. EMP weapons have the potential to disrupt unprotected critical infrastructure within the U.S. and could impact millions over large parts of the country. Remember what they say here, could. Since the President's signing of the EO in March 2019, DHS, through Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, in coordination with Science and Technology Directorate and the Federal Emergency Agency, FEMA, has taken key actions to address known EMP-related vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. The EMP program status reports highlight efforts taken across the public and private sector to foster increased resilience to EMP events through data analysis, vulnerability and risk assessments, testing and pilot programs, and government and industry engagement. The department is identifying critical infrastructure and associated functions that are at greatest risk from an EMP and developing and implementing best practices to reduce the risk. EMP attacks are part of an emerging threat against our nation and demand a response, said senior official performing the duties of Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli. That is why DHS is taking these contingencies very seriously and working diligently to mitigate our risk and equipping our state and local partners with the resources they need to do the same. We've made significant progress and look forward to the work ahead. As a nation, Risk Advisor, one of CISA's priorities is understanding and mitigating threats associated with EMPs, said CISA Director Chris Cribbs. Over the past year, we have worked with interagency industry partners to identify the footprint and effects of EMP threats across the national critical functions and are developing sustainable, efficient, cost-effective approaches to improving the nation's resilience to EMPs. In 2018, DHS released the strategy for protecting and preparing the homeland against threats from electromagnetic pulse, EMP, and geomagnetic disturbances, GMD, which, that comes from the sun. Good luck with that. Which was the department's first articulation of a holistic, long-term, partnership-based approach to protecting critical infrastructure and preparing to respond and recover from potentially catastrophic electromagnetic incidents. Now, the thing you need to take from this is keywords: could, potentially. There's a reason for that. Nobody really knows, not the U.S., not Russia, not China, not Britain, not any other nuclear power, the full extent that an EMP caused by a nuclear detonation will have on current, electronics, electrical grids, or our infrastructure. And I'll get into that here in just a few minutes. So this was it. 5 paragraphs. And that sparked panic plane to take off and the fear train to leave the station. Oh yeah. But unless I missed it, and you can point it out, there's nothing said here about any type of threat known to exist at the moment. And they'll use words like potential, evolving. Well, yeah. The U.S., as well as any other country on the face of the planet, is always at the risk of a potential or evolving threat or attack. It's just the way it is, folks, the way it's been all through man's history. But let's take a look at this electromagnetic pulse program status report. And we'll click over to it right now. So, here it is. We'll click on it. And that brings us over here to Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. And they only have two little tiny paragraphs here before we'll click on the report that's showed right here underneath it. Electromagnetic Pulse EMP Program Status Report. Not a warning, but we'll get to that. In accordance with Executive Order 13865, and see that's something important, accordance to. See, they got to do this occasionally, probably every quarter if I had to guess. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, through CISA, and in coordination with interagencies, is taking key actions to address known EMP-related vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure. The EMP Program Status Report addresses efforts taken by DHS to foster increased resilience to EMP events through vulnerability assessments, testing and pilot programs, data analysis and validation, risk assessments, and public and private sector coordination. So let's get right on to it. Let's click on this bad boy down here. And that brings us to this report. Got a nice American flag going there. I can dig it. Oh, but look at it. It's not recent. Now DHS just released this report and gave their little 5-paragraph report on the 3rd of September, but it says right here this report was released on August 17th. A little bit late there, aren't you, DHS? But I'm just saying. Can't be all that earth-shattering, can it, folks? And it gives you a table of contents. It's going to tell you about the background, defining what is critical, DHS preparedness activities, partnering with private sector and other federal departments, piloting EMP risk mitigation, and, of course, conclusion. And like always, all these links to these websites, articles, and reference materials will be included below the video in the description, just like always when I do one of these. So it gives you the background, which starts with, President Trump signed the Executive Order EO 13865 back on March 26, 2019. And that tells you what it states. We're not going to read in all that. You'll have a link. You can read this thing for yourself. And that. And then they define what is critical right here. DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, through the National Risk Management Center, leads the department in interagency coordination and program management to plan, implement EMP executive and legislative requirements designated to DHS for implementation. A month after signing of the EO, the NRMC, in coordination with sector-specific agencies, established and released a primary set of NCFs. The NCFs are government and private sector functions considered so vital to the U.S. that their disruption, corruption, or dysfunction would have debilitating effects on national security, economic security, public health or safety, or any combination thereof. The NCFs set the conditions for an analysis of the system dependencies specific to EMP threat, as well as other scenarios of concern. In addition to traditional models for determining criticality, DHS, in partnership with federal interagency, is assessing how the widespread, simultaneous effects of an EMP could affect these critical models. DHS is developing new concepts and approaches to evaluate how simultaneous common component failures could cause cascading failures across critical infrastructures, as well as hinder response recovery operations due to a lack of repair parts and personnel. DHS is continuing to refine these models to support the development of initial quadrennial EMP risk assessment and building vulnerability test plans in accordance with the EO. Don't tell us to find what's critical. Just tell us about some NCS. I guess that's a secret. But I would take one of them and be the power grid, as well as all national defense interests. We just had to say. And then they go on here in the third section, DHS preparedness activities. I won't go through all this because, you know, it's just long-winded and don't say a whole lot. One thing it does say here, you know, in 2017, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the Department of Energy, DOE, jointly developed the Power Outage Incident Annex, managing the cascading impacts from a long-term power outage. In 2020, FEMA, in consultation with Federal Interagency, determined that the Power Outage Annex would serve as a baseline for emergency response planning associated with an EMP. Based on that determination, DHS, along with other federal departments and agencies, have updated or are updating operational plans to align with the Annex planning guidance. Now, what this Annex is, they only know, and I guess we don't need to. But then they go down here to tell us about partnering with private sector and other federal departments. And they talk about that piloting EMP risk mitigation. And they talk specifically about the San Antonio Electromagnetic Defense Initiative, like we discussed previously. And then they give here the conclusion. Recognizing that EMP presents a strategic threat to the nation, DHS continues to plan, execute on the President's and Congress's intent of sustainability, efficient, and cost-effective approaches to EMP mitigation. DHS will ensure collaboration across all relevant parties, continue to identify where the EMP threat presents the greatest risk to critical infrastructure, focus efforts to ensure public and private sector mitigation efforts are scientifically based and have traceable reductions in the risk related to EMP. DHS is committed to all its mission, including ensuring federal continuity and safeguarding the American people, our homeland, and our values. Threats to our safety and security, including those from an EMP, are constantly evolving and require continuous risk assessments and adaptive strategies to affect and address them. In the last year, the department has made great progress, and this work will continue with a particular focus on the partnership with industry and hardening critical infrastructure in the next year and beyond. So, and you can read this for yourself. Nowhere through this thing does it talk about the potential, pending, or that of any EMP threat from anyone. Nope, sure don't. The only thing it says, and it's just one word right down here in the conclusion, was evolving. And like I already told you, threats are always evolving against the U.S., let alone a huge number of countries. Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Britain, the EU, it just goes on, as well as so many countries in South America and Africa. So, I just don't see where we can take from this, or DHS's little 5-paragraph report, and come up with the fact that DHS is warning us of a potential EMP attack before the presidential election. I just don't get it. But I'll let you read it, and if you can drag it out of here, you can tell me about it in the comments. But is this anything new? Is this not something we've known about for a really, really long time? Oh yeah. You know what? We've known about this now for about 60 years. Yep, sure have. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to look at when we became aware of this and the timeline and the history behind EMPs. So here we are at the Lexington Institute website, and I chose this particular site because it gives a concise historical timeline from when we knew the effects of an EMP or GMD, geomagnetic disturbance, and the history of major key events. And just like it says right here, after decades of warning, the U.S. gets serious about EMP dangers. For decades, government policy experts and scientists have known about the dangers of electromagnetic pulse, EMP events, which could cripple large sections of the power grid for long periods of time. EMP disturbances occur naturally through solar storms. They could also happen due to high altitude nuclear bomb detonations or through on-the-ground attacks by terrorists or saboteurs. Now, I want you to remember this one sentence. They could also happen due to high-altitude nuclear bomb detonations or through on-the-ground attacks by terrorists or saboteurs. Reason being, because later on, towards the end of this video, when I make my conclusions from my analysis and my knowledge of EMPs, I'll tell you my final thoughts. So remember this sentence. While the U.S. has been able to avoid major EMP events for decades, it must play catch-up on preparations. The U.S. Department of Defense has long fortified key military installations along with potential EMP attacks, but there have been few steps taken to protect the civilian power grid. And it was when I was working a long time ago as an engineer in a certain discipline that I'm not going to discuss, nor am I going to discuss my duties and responsibilities, but I actually worked for one of the largest defense contractors in the U.S. at the time. And it would be at that time that I would become educated, very knowledgeable, and participate in protecting our national security from none other than EMPs for the Department of Defense. And then it goes on to talk about on March 26, President Trump issued an executive order. We've already discussed that and everything. But here it says, below is a summary of some of the key events and studies that have given us ample warning of dire effects of EMP events and the need to make protective, preemptive actions. And the one you're always going to hear about in almost all articles, research papers, or anything to do with EMPs, they're always going to refer back to September the 1st, 1859. And it's an event known as the Carrington event, which hurls billions of tons of electrons and protons to the Earth. This results in electrical shocks to telegraph operators in Europe and the United States, while also setting telegraph papers on fire. The consequences of a similar event today would be catastrophic, as discussed in entries below for 2008 and July the 23rd, 2014. But is that so? You got to understand, these were telegraph wires, low voltage and very low wire diameter or conductor diameter as it is known. In the 1950s, electronic equipment failed because of induced currents and voltages from a U.S. nuclear test, and that's all it says. On November 1961, the Air Force Special Weapons Center issues a report on Operation Fishbowl. The primary objective, which was to obtain data regarding the interference to radar and communication systems produced by a high-altitude nuclear burst. So we're getting close to the time when the U.S. would understand the potential and possibility of the effects of EMPs. On July the 9th, 1962, a single nuclear weapon, codenamed Starfish Prime, is detonated at an altitude of 250 miles, approximately 900 miles southwest of Hawaii. From the distance, it damages the state's electrical system, knocking out 300 streetlights, setting off burglar alarms and shutting down telephone lines. Now, I want to take this event right here, and you'll hear about it mentioned sometimes, Starfish Prime, and the effects it had on Hawaii. But things will be exaggerated. It knocked out the whole power grid of Hawaii, knocked out the phone systems. No, it didn't. It did knock out 300 streetlights, and it set off burglar alarms and shutting down some telephone lines during that. But in 1962, the Soviet Union conducts 3 high-altitude nuclear detonations in South Central Asia. According to a congressional report, they report that on each shot, they observed damage to overhead and underground buried cables at distances of 600 kilometers. They also observed surge arresters burn out, spark gap breakdown, blown fuses, and power supply breakdowns. Now, I don't know how Congress knew about all this, since by the time 1962, the Soviet Union was not a friend of the U.S. because we were in that thing called the Cold War. But I'll leave it at that. On March the 13th, 1989, the entire province of Quebec, Canada, suffers an electrical blackout from a solar storm. And this did actually happen. Caused by explosions on the sun. This was actually from sunspots. The effects reverberate to the United States, where 1,560 megawatts of power, enough electricity for 1.3 million homes, are lost in New York and New England. Reserve power prevented U.S. communities from losing electricity despite the large energy loss. And here again, if you look up March the 13th, 1989, or for that matter, power outages in New York in 1989, you'll find no mention of a power outage. Why? Because power did not go down for any significant length of time in anywhere in New York or New England. Here again, yes, the entire province of Quebec, Canada did have a power outage, and you can also do your research and look this up. It was for 9 hours. Some areas, 13 hours. That was it. October 2000, congressionally mandated commission to assess the threat to the United States from electromagnetic pulse attack is established. Now think about that. That's in 2000. By fiscal year 2001, the Defense Authorization Act, its mission included assessing the feasibility and cost of hardening select military and civilian systems against EMP attack. July 22, 2004. A report by the Congressional EMP Commission warns of potential catastrophe. The electromagnetic fields produced by weapons designed and deployed with intent to produce EMP have a high likelihood of damaging electrical power systems, electronics, and information systems upon which America's society depends. In 2008, National Research Council, part of the National Academy of Science, issues an in-depth report. Severe space weather events. It warns collateral effects of long-term outage would likely include, for example, disruption of transportation, communication, banking, financial systems, government services, the breakdown of the distribution of potable water owing to pump failure. The damage could exceed $2 trillion, 20 times the cost of Hurricane Katrina. Now I want you to look at these dates when these things come out, because I mentioned before, the hysteria, the hype, the threat, the fear, and the panic of EMPs always comes out, and if you research back, you see 2000, 2004, 2008, those are presidential election. Yep. Well, in fact, the preceding year would have been, and the year before. And if you do the research, you'll find out these particular reports started prior to the election years. April 29, 2008, a report from Congressional EMP Commission warns electromagnetic pulse generated by a high-altitude nuclear explosion is one of a small number of threats that can hold our society at risk of catastrophic consequences. Increasingly persuasive use of electronics of all forms represents the greatest source of vulnerability to attack by EMP. In September of 2010, United Kingdom Defense Secretary Dr. Liam Fox tells a security conference that rogue states such as North Korea and Iran could use nuclear weapons to attack Britain's vital communications and electricity networks from space. July 23, 2014, NASA reports that a major EMP solar storm like the 1859 Carrington event has a 12% chance of occurring in the next decade. Well, here it is, 2020, 6 years past, still hasn't happened. We'll have to see about the next 4, right? May the 27th, 2015, an open letter to President Obama. Now, look at that date, 2015, right before the 2016 election for president. Signed by 31 military and national security experts, begins by saying, "We need your personal intervention to provide for protection of the American people against an existential threat posed by natural and man-made electromagnetic pulse." It continues, "Both Republicans and Democrats have known how to deal with this issue for at least 30 years. As you can see, it's been 60 nearly. It continues, both Republicans and Democrats have known how to deal with the issue, and bipartisan efforts in Congress have failed in spite of the fact that neither technology nor expense should be an issue." And then we go to July 2017. A report by the Congressional EMP Commission calls for strong action. The Commission strongly recommends the implementation of cybersecurity for the electrical grid and other critical infrastructures, include EMP protection. Understand this, cybersecurity, but then also to include EMP protection. The Commission also recommends electric grid equipment with long replacement times, such as large power transformers, be tested to system failure. On November 28, 2018, the U.S. Air Force Electromagnetic Defense Task Force issues a report. Based on insights from 135 military and civilian experts, it notes the window of opportunity to mitigate some electromagnetic threats is closing. And then, March 26, 2019, President Trump issues an executive order on coordinating national resilience on electromagnetic pulses. So you can see, since 1962, we knew for sure that indeed EMPs could affect, to some extent, our power system. So let's take a look at what a couple of other sources say what could possibly happen from an EMP attack or a solar storm on the U.S. Now remember, even though they might have the same effects, they're not exactly the same. So, the most important thing that we're all concerned about with is our electric power grid, right? Because that's what's going to impact all of us all across America. Now this is the NRECA, America's Electric Cooperatives. And this is a report on electromagnetic pulse would not have the widespread impact on the electric grid. Yep, that's their conclusion. Just putting it to you straight before we go down through what they got to say. The U.S. electric transmission system would largely survive a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse event caused by a nuclear warhead atmospheric explosion. An intensive investigation by the Electric Power Research Institute has found. EPRI released its 3-year study, High Altitude Electromagnetic Pulse, EMP, and the bulk power system, potential impacts and mitigation strategies on April the 30th. That was of 2019, by the way. Researchers conducted laboratory testing and analysis to determine the effect on the transmission grid from an EMP triggered by the unlikely event of a nuclear warhead detonated approximately 30 kilometers, about 18 miles above the Earth's surface. Now I know you're thinking, well, that's the lowest. What about one at 100 miles, or 120, or 250, or 300? The reason they use this is because the closer the detonation and the blast, the stronger the effects. Actually, going up higher up isn't to strengthen the effects of the EMP blast, but to get wider coverage. Okay? And you can look all that up. An EMP is a series of fast-moving waves of electromagnetic energy that can damage or destroy electronic components and equipment, and also possibly result in voltage stability challenges and high voltage transformer damage. There are concerns that an EMP triggered at the right altitude could bring down the U.S. transmission grid as well as other critical infrastructures like telecommunications, emergency services, and hospitals. But EPRI study found that while direct exposure to the initial pulse could damage or disrupt some transmission electronics, existing resiliency built into the grid would likely prevent catastrophic failure. Recovery from an EMP would be similar to that from other large-scale power outages, EPRI said. An EMP is an extremely unlikely event, but one that the electric industry needs to clearly understand and ensure that cost-effective and potential mitigation measures do not result in unintended consequences or impacts, said NRECA CEO Jim Matheson. This comprehensive study by the EPRI would be a vital tool in that process. The study outlines potential strategies to mitigate EMP impacts, including shielding cables with proper grounding, installing low-voltage surge protection devices and filters, using fiber optics-based communications. Which I might say, my internet is fiber optics. And for a large portion of America, especially within cities and urban areas, metropolitan, it's fiber optics. More than 60 U.S. utilities and Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the Department of Energy, 3 national laboratories, and the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council report contributed to this report. EPRI's research represents the largest utility collaborative on the issue focused on understanding the technical facts using both laboratory testing and advanced modeling. And Michael W. Howard, President and CEO of EPRI, the results also provide a cost-effective pathway to enhance the resilience of the grid and accelerate recovery. The study comes as President Trump called on federal agencies in collaboration with the private sector to prepare for the effects of an EMP event. An executive order in March called for the federal government to warn industry of impending EMP attack and provide protection and recovery through public and private engagement, planning, and investment. So there you have it. They've already done laboratory case studies, and this was their conclusion. What do you think? And now what I got to ask you is why all the mainstream media and all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of social media platforms on various levels, prepping, social justice journalism, homesteading, or what have you, don't mention anything about this. Oh no! The reason being, this takes away the fear. This mitigates the very thing they're using to propagate the fear and the panic. To do what? To get you to view their news reports, their programs, their videos. Yes, sir. It's all about the marketing. And as we all know, fear is one of the top 3 most impactful and well-used marketing techniques. Oh yeah. Fear's probably number one, sex being number two, and greed being number three. From this report, yeah, could our power grid possibly be knocked out for a bit? Well, according to this, no more longer than any other large-scale power outage that we have. It won't be for 6 months, a year, 5 years, or 10, like far too many people and far too many sites on both social media and mainstream media have touted, especially here over the last few years. But this isn't all I got to say to calm your fears and hopefully save you some anxiety and, I hope, money. Let's look at another most interesting site. So y'all, brought you over to this site, nuclear bomb craters in Nevada. Yep, you might be wondering, why did I bring you to a site showing nuclear bomb craters in Nevada? Well, I have an interesting point to make. You see, this is the Nevada National Security Site, previously the Nevada Test Site, in the United States Department of Energy reservation located in the southeastern Nile County, Nevada, about 65 miles, 105 kilometers northwest of the city of Vegas. Remember that. It's only 65 miles away from Las Vegas. Formerly known as the Nevada Proving Grounds. The site was established on 11th January 1951 for testing of nuclear devices during the 1950s. The mushroom clouds from the 100 atmospheric tests could be seen almost 100 miles, 160 kilometers away. The city of Las Vegas experienced noticeable seismic effects, and the distant mushroom clouds, which could be seen from the downtown hotels, became a tourist attraction. The vast majority, 828, of the 928 total nuclear tests were underground. But what's important to note is those first 100 atmospheric tests. Now, some of which were atomic weapons. Others were nuclear, hydrogen bombs. Some of the most powerful weapons ever developed by man. And these atmospheric tests were conducted at differing altitudes. And the reason being for that was to judge the effects, measure the effects, and analyze them to see what happened, not only with the blast, but all other effects by the differences in detonating the bombs at various altitudes. And you still be may wondering, why is that important? Well, it's 65 miles from Nevada, closer to a lot of other communities if you go up on Google Maps and take a look at this particular site. And why that's important is, you can do your own research. I did. I can find no mention, not one time, of Las Vegas or any other community suffering any form of power outages or problems with their communication systems. Now granted, this was during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But they had telephones, they had telegraphs, they had electricity, and yet, with 100 atmospheric tests being conducted, there is no reporting of any significant problems, or any problems for that matter, that I could find with having any power outages, telephone outages, or telegraph. Now, if the EMP threat was so existential, so outright destructive, then why, during those 100 atmospheric tests, did not Las Vegas and surrounding communities have any issues? You see, the U.S. military has known the effects of EMPs for quite some time. And yeah, there are some issues, especially in non-hardened situations close to the blast. But you got to remember this too, folks. We're talking about nuclear weapons. If you're going to worry about the EMP, well, what about the blast? The sheer strength and magnitude of a nuclear weapon far exceeds any damage we could experience from EMPs. Oh yeah. But you're going to say, well, a nuclear weapon detonated above our atmosphere, there wouldn't be much of a blast. Well, that's true. I'm not sure how much there'd be. Maybe some, maybe not none. But it brings me back to the point. None of the surrounding communities, as well as a major U.S. city, had any problems. In fact, it became a tourist sensation. People drove out, got hotel rooms in Las Vegas, just to watch the spectacle of an atomic or nuclear weapon being detonated. Yes, they did. Now, I grew up during that time. 50s, 60s, 70s, while all this was going on. And I can tell you for a fact, never heard anything about any consequences happening from any of those tests outside of the proving grounds. Now, with all that said, as our government knew during the testing and would later become, sadly, even more aware of, there were problems with the nuclear testing at the Nevada proving grounds. It wasn't from EMPs, it was from radiation. And it is known that there have been up to 774,000 Americans that suffered some sort of health issues due to exposure from radiation, to include cancer. In fact, there's actually a nuclear compensation fund that was used to compensate the victims of this testing that were downwind of the tests where the radiation from the fallout fell out of the sky. Yep, sure did. I know this too is a fact because that was one of the things that bothered my father the most during his latter parts of his military career, up until the point that he decided to retire. He talked to me several times about it. It bothered Dad greatly that we, as the freest country in the world, actually poisoned our own citizens for the sake of defense of the nation. But my point being, no impact here to power grids, phone lines, or telegraphs. Sort of sounds similar to what the report from America's cooperative electric companies came up with in their lab tests and in their other tests. So I'll leave it to you. If you want to be extremely worried about an EMP, go right ahead. I'd be more worried about a nuclear war, because I'm going to tell you what. If somebody sets off a nuclear blast over America, they've got more to worry about. If someone wanted to do that, they're basically starting a nuclear war. Straight out and simple. We will retaliate. And you might say, well, we won't be able to. All of our infrastructure will be knocked out. Our power grids, our communications. Oh no. I truly think the military's got that handled. They got plenty of underground facilities that are more than capable of coordinating any type of military counterattack. Not to mention all of our nuclear capable subs out in the oceans all around the world, many of which carry missiles with nuclear warheads. Yes, they do. I think a country would have to be insane. And because of what happened in Nevada, I also don't worry about a terrorist bringing a bomb into the U.S. and setting one off to cause an EMP blast to take down our grid or our communications. Because a ground level blast or low altitude didn't have any impact during all these tests. Why would it now? So my conclusion is I'm not going to lose sleep over an EMP. And even if I did think an EMP was something to be really worried about, which I don't, you got to ask yourself this one basic question. If indeed an EMP or multiple EMP weapons were deployed and detonated above the U.S. and did take down our entire power grid and communications so severely that we would not be able to restore it for years, what good is it saving all your electronics, your power generators, solar panels, inverters? They're not going to do you any good. Something to think about. And folks, that's about all I got to say about it, in my opinion. And I looked at many more sites. These are just some I picked out of hundreds that I've read over and hundreds of hours of research. I wish I could include every site. I wish I could show you every one here on video. But most people won't watch this one, let alone watch one that included it all. And I already know as I end this video, I'm going to have more people come after me than likes which God hadn't seen. Because what I reveal here is no matter the fear and the panic that they're trying to market and instill in their viewers and their followers, it's just not real. And that's all it is. Fear and panic for personal gain. And that, my folks, is the true evil of modern man. I do hope this video finds y'all well, safe, and happy in your homes, with your friends, family, and your loved ones. As always, pray for our community, our country, and our planet. So until I see you on the next one, y'all take care out there, stay safe, and goodbye for now.